The first transmission came at 3:47 hours, crackling through the static like a ghost trying to speak. Major Kale Nakamura pressed her headset closer to her ear, straining to decode what sounded like atmospheric interference over the Pacific. The voice was female, desperate, and transmitting on a frequency that hadn't been used since the Cold War. Mayday, Mayday, this is Raven 7, engines failing, 30,000 feet and descending. Nakamura's fingers hovered over her radio controls inside the cramped cockpit of her F-22 Raptor. The pre-dawn darkness stretched endlessly around her formation of 4 aircraft, their stealth profiles cutting through the thin air like sharks through black water. Below, the Pacific Ocean rolled in invisible waves, a vast cemetery of lost aircraft and forgotten battles. "Control, this is Phantom One," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "We're picking up distress calls on frequency 270.5. Can you confirm any aircraft in our vicinity?" The response from Edwards Air Force Base came back negative. No scheduled flights, no training exercises, no aircraft whatsoever in the designated airspace. Yet the Mayday calls continued, growing more frantic with each transmission. The voice belonged to someone who knew proper radio protocol, someone trained, someone real. Nakamura banked her Raptor slightly, scanning the darkness through her helmet-mounted display. The HUD painted the sky in green phosphorescence, but revealed nothing except empty air and the occasional star. Her wingmen maintained formation, their aircraft visible only as faint heat signatures on her thermal imaging. "Raven 7, this is Phantom One," she broadcast on the emergency frequency. "State your position and aircraft type." Silence answered her. Then, after what felt like eternity, the crackling returned. "Phantom One, thank God. My instruments are dark, somewhere over the Pacific. I think I'm flying a ghost." A ghost? Nakamura's blood ran cold. She'd heard whispers about the program in classified briefings. Experimental aircraft that officially didn't exist, test flights that never happened, pilots who disappeared into black-budget operations and were never seen again. The kind of stories that circulated in hushed conversations between missions, dismissed by most as conspiracy theories or war stories grown tall in the telling. But she recognized something in that voice, something familiar that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. The cadence, the way certain words were pronounced, the particular blend of fear and determination that came through even the static. "Ghost pilot, can you give me a visual reference? Any landmarks?" "Negative on landmarks, but Phantom One." The voice paused, and when it continued, there was something different in the tone, something that sounded almost like recognition. "I can see your formation, 4 Raptors. You're flying in diamond pattern about 2 miles northeast of my position." Nakamura's head snapped up, scanning the darkness with renewed intensity. If the unknown pilot could see them, they had to be close, very close, yet her instruments showed nothing but empty sky. The mystery deepened like a storm gathering on the horizon, and Major Kale Nakamura found herself at the center of something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the sky she'd called home for the past 15 years. In the pre-dawn darkness over the Pacific, with static-filled voices speaking of ghost aircraft and impossible sightings, the morning's routine patrol had become something else entirely. Something that would test not just her skills as a pilot, but her understanding of loyalty, sacrifice, and the thin line between the living and the lost. "Control," she transmitted, her voice cutting through the static. "We have a situation out here." "Control to Phantom One, describe your situation." Nakamura hesitated, knowing how her next words would sound to the operations staff sitting safely in their underground command center hundreds of miles away. "We have contact with an unknown aircraft. Pilot claims to have visual on our formation, but we show negative radar contact. Request permission to investigate." The silence from Edwards stretched longer than usual. Finally, Colonel Martinez's gravelly voice came through the speakers. "Phantom One, You are cleared to investigate. Maintain formation discipline and report any unusual findings immediately. Nakamura acknowledged the transmission and switched to her flight's internal frequency. Phantom Flight, this is lead. We're going hunting for a ghost. Stay sharp and stay together. Lieutenant Commander James Rico Vasquez, her wingman for the past 3 years, came back with his characteristic dry humor. Copy that, lead. Should we be looking for chains and floating bedsheets, or the regular kind of ghost? The kind that flies experimental aircraft and knows our tactical frequencies, Nakamura replied. Phantom 2, take high cover. 3 and 4, spread search pattern. Whatever's out there, it's close enough to see us but invisible to our sensors. The formation began to spread, each pilot adjusting their flight path according to years of training and countless hours of coordinated flying. Nakamura pushed her throttles forward slightly, feeling the familiar surge of power as her twin Pratt and Whitney engines responded. The F-22s fly-by-wire controls translated her inputs with computer-assisted precision, the aircraft becoming an extension of her will. At 38,000 feet, the air was thin enough that each breath required the oxygen system's assistance, but thick enough for the Raptor's control surfaces to bite into the atmosphere with authority. Nakamura had always loved this altitude, high enough to see the curvature of the Earth, high enough to feel separated from the mundane concerns of the ground-bound world, yet low enough to remember that she was still bound by the laws of physics and the limitations of her machine. Raven 7, this is Phantom 1, she called again. I need you to describe what you see. Give me details about our aircraft. The response came back immediately, as if the unknown pilot had been waiting for the question. Lead aircraft is slightly ahead of formation. I can see your exhaust plume, blue flame with white edges. Your wingman to the right is maintaining about 300 feet separation. The other 2 are spreading wider. Looks like a search pattern. Nakamura's skin prickled. The description was too accurate, too specific. Whoever was out there could indeed see them, which meant they were close enough to identify exhaust characteristics and formation changes. But her radar remained stubbornly empty, showing nothing but the vast Pacific darkness below and her own 3 wingmen maintaining their assigned positions. Raven 7, what type of aircraft are you flying? Another pause, filled with static and what sounded like wind noise. That's classified, Phantom 1, but I can tell you it's not like anything currently in the inventory. Stealth characteristics beyond anything you've seen. Rico's voice cut through the internal frequency. Lead, I've got something weird on thermal imaging. Bearing 270, distance approximately 1 mile. It's faint, but there's definitely a heat source moving parallel to our course. Nakamura immediately banked toward the bearing, her eyes scanning both her instruments and the darkness ahead. Raven 7, I'm coming around to your heading. Can you give me a position relative to my aircraft? You're turning toward me now, came the immediate reply. I can see your navigation lights. Red on the left wing, green on the right. You're about 30 degrees off my nose, closing slowly. The hair on the back of Nakamura's neck stood up. Her navigation lights were dark, had been dark since takeoff as per standard protocol for their training mission. No external lights, minimum radio emissions, maximum stealth configuration. Yet somehow, the unknown pilot was describing details that should have been invisible in the pre-dawn darkness. Control, this is Phantom 1, she transmitted on the command frequency. Contact is providing visual details that shouldn't be possible given current light conditions and our stealth configuration. Request guidance on rules of engagement. The response from Edwards came back with bureaucratic caution wrapped in military precision. Phantom 1, you are cleared to investigate and identify, but do not engage unless threatened. Repeat, identify but do not engage without direct provocation. Nakamura acknowledged the transmission while simultaneously processing the implications. Rules of engagement protocols meant someone at Edwards was taking this seriously enough to consider the possibility of hostile contact. The playful atmosphere that had marked the beginning of their patrol was rapidly giving way to something more serious, more professional, and significantly more dangerous. "Phantom flight, weapons safe but ready," she ordered. This could be anything from a lost civilian to a foreign reconnaissance platform. Stay alert. As her formation adjusted to combat spacing, Nakamura found herself wondering who or what they were really chasing through the pre-dawn Pacific sky, and why every instinct she developed over 15 years of military flying was telling her that this encounter was going to change everything. "Raven 7, she called out, her voice carrying across the static-filled frequency. "This is Phantom 1. We're going to need you to identify yourself and your aircraft. This is not a request." The static seemed to grow heavier before the response came, and when it did, the voice carried a weight of sadness that cut through the electronic interference like a blade. "Phantom 1, my name is Captain Alina Ghost Restrepo, United States Air Force, and according to my records, I died 3 years ago." The words hung in the thin air between them like a physical presence, challenging everything Nakamura thought she understood about the mission, the military, and the nature of the sky itself. In the growing pre-dawn light, with the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly below and the stars beginning to fade overhead, Major Kale Nakamura realized she was no longer flying a routine training mission. She was flying into a mystery that would test everything she believed about duty, honor, and the price of serving something larger than herself. The voice claiming to be Captain Alina Restrepo had just opened a door to questions that the military would prefer remained forever unanswered, and Nakamura found herself holding the key to secrets that might be better left buried in the vast darkness of the Pacific night. "Control," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the implications racing through her mind. "We're going to need everything you have on Captain Alina Restrepo, call sign Ghost, presumed killed in action 3 years ago." The silence from Edwards Air Force Base spoke volumes. Major Nakamura's hands remained steady on the controls, but her mind raced through the implications of what she just heard. Captain Alina Restrepo. The name triggered fragments of memory from classified briefings, whispered conversations in ready rooms, and the kind of stories that circulated among pilots like ghost stories around a campfire. She remembered now. Restrepo had been part of an experimental program, something involving next-generation stealth technology and test flights that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. The official story was that she'd been killed during a training accident, her aircraft lost somewhere over the Pacific during a routine test flight. There had been a memorial service, a flag presentation to her family, and then the kind of institutional silence that surrounded classified programs when something went wrong. "Phantom 2, you getting this conversation?" she asked Rico on their internal frequency. "Copy lead. And I've got to tell you, this is getting weird fast. My thermal imaging is showing that heat signature more clearly now. Whatever it is, it's flying in formation with us, maintaining perfect spacing about 800 meters off our port side." Nakamura turned her head, peering through the darkness in the direction Rico had indicated. At first, she saw nothing but stars and the faint glow of the approaching dawn on the eastern horizon. Then, as her eyes adjusted and she shifted slightly in her seat, she caught it. A faint distortion in the starfield, like heat shimmer rising from summer asphalt, except they were flying at 38,000 feet where the air temperature was well below freezing. "Raven 7, Alina, if that's really who you are, I need you to explain what happened 3 years ago. The official record says you were killed in a training accident." The static seemed to pulse with emotion before the response came. "The official record says a lot of things, Phantom 1. But what really happened is that I volunteered for something that doesn't officially exist. A program so classified that the people running it don't even have names. just designation numbers and security clearances that go deeper than most people know exist. Nakamura felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thin air around her aircraft. She'd heard rumors about programs like that, black-budget projects that operated outside normal military channels, funded through budgets that didn't appear in any public documentation, staffed by people who signed agreements that effectively erased their previous identities. The aircraft I'm flying, Alina's voice continued, represents about 20 years of research into stealth technology, materials science, and propulsion systems that won't appear in mainstream military aviation for another decade. It's not invisible to radar because it absorbs electromagnetic radiation. It's invisible because it exists in a slightly different phase relationship to normal space-time. Rico's voice cut through the internal frequency with barely controlled skepticism. Lead, please tell me she's not claiming to be flying a science fiction aircraft. Before Nakamura could respond, Alina's voice came back through the static, and this time there was something that might have been amusement mixed with the sadness. I can hear your wingman, Phantom One. And no, it's not science fiction. It's just science that's about 50 years ahead of what most people think is possible. The phase relationship I mentioned is achieved through manipulation of quantum field fluctuations using crystalline matrices that. Alina, Nakamura interrupted, save the technical explanation for the debrief. Right now I need to know why you're out here, why you're making contact after 3 years of being officially dead, and what you expect us to do about it. The silence stretched longer this time, and when Alina's voice returned, it carried a weight of desperation that made Nakamura's chest tighten with sympathy. Because something's gone wrong with the aircraft's temporal displacement system. I've been trying to return to normal space-time coordinates for the past 18 months, but each time I make the transition, I end up further displaced from my original timeline. Nakamura felt the universe tilt slightly around her. Temporal displacement. Timeline shifts. 3 years ago, she would have dismissed such claims as the ravings of someone suffering from hypoxia or psychological breakdown. But the heat signature on Rico's thermal imaging, the impossible accuracy of Alina's visual descriptions, and the growing certainty in her gut that she was dealing with something far beyond normal military operations made dismissal impossible. "Control, this is Phantom One," she transmitted to Edwards. "I need immediate priority connection with whoever was running experimental stealth programs 3 years ago. This is no longer a standard intercept situation." The response came back with the kind of delays that indicated multiple people were consulting multiple security protocols before anyone dared to speak. "Phantom One, Control. That information is classified beyond your current clearance level. Continue your investigation and report any developments immediately." Nakamura bit back her response. After 15 years of military service, she recognized bureaucratic evasion when she heard it. Someone at Edwards knew exactly what they were dealing with, but wasn't willing to share that information with the pilots currently flying the intercept mission. "Alina, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you in immediate danger? Is your aircraft stable?" "Stable is a relative term when you're existing partially outside normal space-time," came the reply. "But to answer your question, yes, I'm in danger. The quantum field generators that maintain phase displacement are failing. If they collapse completely, the aircraft and I will be scattered across several thousand cubic miles of atmosphere in a manner that would make identification challenging." Rico's voice carried a note of dark humor. "Lead, please tell me she's not saying she's about to explode across multiple dimensions." "That's actually a fairly accurate description," Alina replied, apparently still able to monitor their internal communications. "Though I prefer to think of it as spontaneous molecular redistribution across parallel quantum states." Nakamura found herself in the surreal position of conducting a combat air patrol while discussing theoretical physics with a pilot who had been officially dead for 3 years and claimed to be flying an aircraft that existed partially outside normal reality. The professional part of her mind noted that this was definitely not covered in any of the training manuals she'd studied during her career. How long do you have before these quantum field generators fail completely? Based on current degradation rates, I estimate between 6 and 8 hours before total system collapse. But Phantom 1, Calais, there's something else you need to know. The use of her first name sent another chill through Nakamura's body. Military protocols discouraged personal familiarity during operational communications. But more than that, something in Alina's tone suggested knowledge that went beyond anything that should have been possible. I'm listening. I know who you are, not just your call sign and aircraft type. I know about the engagement over Syria 2 years ago, when you held formation despite surface-to-air missiles and brought your entire flight home safely. I know about the letter of reprimand you received for refusing to abandon a search and rescue mission when fuel was critically low. And I know about the recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross that was downgraded to a commendation because someone in the chain of command thought a female pilot receiving such recognition might send the wrong message about military priorities. The accuracy of those details hit Nakamura like physical blows. The Syria engagement was classified at multiple levels. The reprimand was buried in her personnel file, where only a handful of people with appropriate clearances could access it. And the downgraded medal recommendation was something she'd never discussed with anyone, not even Rico. How do you know about those incidents? Because in my timeline, you were my wingman during the Syria engagement. In my timeline, you were the one who volunteered for the experimental program that led to this aircraft. And in my timeline, you're the one who died during the first test flight 3 years ago. The words seemed to echo in the thin air around Nakamura's aircraft, carrying implications that her mind struggled to process. Multiple timelines, alternative realities where different versions of herself had made different choices and faced different fates. The very concept challenged everything she understood about causality, identity, and the nature of existence itself. "Alina," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her thoughts, "assuming I believe what you're telling me, what do you need from us? How can we help?" "I need someone to witness what happens when the quantum field generators fail. I need someone to record the evidence that these programs exist, that people like me have been sacrificed for technology that might not even be worth the cost. And most importantly, I need someone to make sure that the version of Calais Nakamura in this timeline doesn't make the same mistake I made in mine." The weight of that responsibility settled on Nakamura's shoulders like a physical burden. She was being asked to serve as chronicler for events that officially didn't exist, guardian for secrets that could destabilize everything the military had built around classified research, and protector for a version of herself that existed in another timeline where different choices had led to different consequences. "Control, this is Phantom One," she transmitted, her voice carrying a new note of authority that surprised even her. "I need immediate connection with whoever has oversight responsibility for experimental aircraft programs. We have a situation that requires command-level attention, and I'm no longer requesting, I'm demanding answers." The silence from Edward stretched long enough to suggest that her transmission had triggered a series of very urgent conversations in very secure rooms. In the growing light of dawn over the Pacific, Major Calais Nakamura found herself at the center of a situation that would test every aspect of her training, her loyalty, and her understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than herself. Behind her, 3 wingmen maintained formation discipline while processing radio conversations that challenged their understanding of reality. Ahead of her, somewhere in the distortion of space-time that bent starlight and confused thermal imaging, a fellow pilot who had been officially dead for 3 years was counting down the hours until her experimental aircraft scattered her molecules across multiple dimensions. And somewhere in the chain of command stretching from Edwards Air Force Base to the Pentagon to facilities that didn't appear on any public map. People with security clearances beyond classification levels were making decisions that would determine not just the fate of Captain Alina Restrepo, but the future of military aviation research, and the price that individual pilots would pay for technologies that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The mission that had begun as routine patrol had become something else entirely, a collision between official reality and classified truth, between the version of events that appeared in public records and the stories that existed only in whispered conversations and redacted documents. And at the center of it all, Major Kale Nakamura flew through the pre-dawn Pacific sky, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she became another casualty of programs that didn't officially exist, or the person who finally brought some measure of truth to the darkness that surrounded military aviation's most closely guarded secrets. The radio crackled with static, and Alina's voice came through once more, carrying a note of urgency that made Nakamura's pulse quicken. Phantom 1, I'm picking up additional aircraft on my sensors. 6 contacts, approaching from the northeast at high speed. They're not showing IFF signals, and their flight profile suggests hostile intent. Nakamura's head snapped up, her eyes immediately scanning the horizon while her hands moved to ready her aircraft's weapons systems. Control, this is Phantom 1. Contact reports multiple unidentified aircraft approaching from the northeast. Request immediate tactical support and rules of engagement. The response from Edwards came back with military efficiency that suggested this development wasn't entirely unexpected. Phantom 1, you are cleared to engage any aircraft that pose a threat to national security interests. Be advised that recovery of experimental technology is priority 1. Repeat, recovery of experimental technology takes precedence over all other considerations. The clinical language of the transmission couldn't hide its implications. Alina's aircraft represented technology valuable enough that Command was willing to risk a 4-ship formation of F-22 Raptors to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, which raised the disturbing question of how enemy forces had located Alina in the first place, and what they knew about experimental programs that were supposedly beyond classification levels. Phantom Flight, this is lead, Nakamura transmitted to her wingman. We've got company incoming. Spread combat formation, weapons hot, but wait for my command to engage. Rico, what are you seeing on sensors? Lead, I've got 6 fast movers, bearing 045, distance approximately 40 miles and closing. Airspeed indicates military fighters, probably something in the F-15 or F-16 class based on radar signature analysis. No IFF response to queries, and they're maintaining radio silence. Nakamura processed the tactical situation with 15 years of combat training guiding her analysis. 6 unknown aircraft approaching at combat speed, no identification signals, complete radio silence, classic indicators of hostile intent. But the timing of their arrival, coinciding perfectly with Alina's emergence from whatever quantum displacement kept her hidden from normal sensors, suggested this wasn't a random encounter. Alina, did your emergence from phase displacement create any kind of electromagnetic signature that could be detected by unfriendly forces? Affirmative, Phantom 1. The quantum field generators emit a specific frequency pattern during transitions between timeline states. If someone has been monitoring for that signature, they could track my location within minutes of transition completion. The pieces of the puzzle began fitting together in Nakamura's mind, creating a picture she didn't like. Alina's experimental aircraft represented technology worth killing for, and someone had been waiting for her to emerge from quantum displacement so they could attempt recovery. The timing suggested intelligence sources with access to highly classified information, which raised uncomfortable questions about security breaches within the experimental programs themselves. Control, this is Phantom 1. Be advised that unknown aircraft appear to have been monitoring for specific electromagnetic signatures associated with experimental technology. This suggests intelligence compromise at multiple levels. Recommend immediate security review of all personnel with access to relevant programs. The silence from Edward stretched long enough to suggest that her transmission had hit targets she hadn't even known existed. Finally, a different voice came back through the speakers, older, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security at the highest levels. Phantom 1, this is General Morrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You are hereby ordered to prevent experimental technology from being compromised by hostile forces. Use any means necessary to ensure recovery, or, if recovery is impossible, complete destruction of relevant assets. Is that understood? Nakamura felt the weight of those words settle into her chest like cold metal. General Morrison wasn't just authorizing her to protect Alina and her aircraft. He was ordering her to destroy both if capture appeared imminent. The clinical term, relevant assets, couldn't disguise the fact that she was being ordered to potentially kill a fellow American pilot to prevent foreign intelligence services from acquiring experimental technology. General Morrison, confirm that you are ordering destruction of American personnel and equipment to prevent foreign acquisition. Phantom 1, I am ordering protection of national security interests using whatever means prove necessary. The decision-making authority for specific tactical actions remains with you as mission commander. But understand that failure to prevent technology compromise will result in consequences that extend far beyond your current chain of command. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Failure to complete the mission successfully wouldn't just end her career. It would result in the kind of consequences that people in her position learned not to think about too carefully. Alina, she transmitted, switching back to the emergency frequency. How much control do you have over your aircraft's quantum displacement system? Limited control, Phantom 1. I can attempt to return to phase displacement, but each transition weakens the field generators further. I might have 1 or 2 shifts left before complete system collapse. And if the system collapses while you're in normal space-time, then the aircraft and I become permanently fixed in this reality, which would make us vulnerable to conventional recovery methods. If it collapses while I'm in phase displacement. Alina's voice trailed off, leaving the implications unspoken. Nakamura didn't need the implications spelled out. Phase displacement collapse would scatter Alina's molecular structure across multiple dimensions, making her death both inevitable and impossible to investigate. It would be the perfect solution for people who wanted experimental technology to disappear without leaving evidence that could embarrass the military or compromise ongoing programs. Rico, distance to unknowns. 25 miles and closing lead. I'm picking up electronic emissions that suggest active radar guidance systems. These guys are definitely military, and they're definitely unfriendly. Nakamura made her decision with the kind of split-second certainty that had kept her alive through 15 years of military flying. Alina, I need you to attempt phase displacement immediately. Get invisible and stay invisible until we deal with these unknowns. Phantom 1, phase displacement will accelerate field generator degradation. I might not be able to return to normal spacetime if you need me to. That's a risk we'll have to take. Right now, keeping you out of enemy hands takes precedence over everything else. Execute phase displacement now. The static on Alina's frequency suddenly changed pitch, rising to a high whine that made Nakamura wince and reach for her volume control. Through the interference, she could hear what sounded like machinery spinning up to impossible speeds, accompanied by a low harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate in her bones despite the impossibility of sound transmission through the vacuum of space. Phase displacement initiated. Alina's voice came through the static, already sounding more distant despite the fact that radio waves shouldn't be affected by whatever exotic physics governed her aircraft. Quantum field generators are at 87% capacity. Transition will be complete in 30 seconds. On Rico's thermal imaging, the faint heat signature that had marked Alina's position began to fade, growing dimmer and more diffuse until it vanished entirely from their sensors. For practical purposes, Captain Alina Restrepo and her experimental aircraft had ceased to exist in any way that normal physics or military technology could detect, which left Major Kale Nakamura and her 3 wingmen alone in the pre-dawn Pacific sky, facing 6 unknown aircraft with hostile intentions and orders that authorized the use of lethal force to protect national security interests that officially didn't exist. Phantom Flight, this is lead. Unknown aircraft are now at 15 miles and still approaching at combat speed. Lock weapons but hold fire until I give the command. If these are foreign military, we're about to make history. If they're not, she paused, considering the implications of engaging unidentified aircraft over international waters. If they're not, we're about to make a very expensive mistake. Rico's voice carried the dry humor that had sustained their partnership through countless dangerous situations. Lead. At this point, I'm pretty sure we're already making history. The question is whether we'll be around to read about it in the classified briefings. The unknown aircraft continued their approach, and Nakamura found herself preparing for air-to-air combat while simultaneously trying to process the reality that she was protecting technology that challenged her understanding of physics, following orders from generals whose names she'd never heard before, and engaging in a mission that would probably never appear in any official records. In the growing light of dawn over the Pacific Ocean, Major Kale Nakamura was about to discover that some secrets were worth dying for, and others were worth killing to protect. The next few minutes would determine which category Alina's experimental aircraft fell into, and whether the price of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge was worth the cost in human lives. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force Flight Phantom 1, she transmitted on the international emergency frequency. You are approaching restricted airspace. Identify yourselves immediately and alter course to avoid engagement. The response came back in accented English that confirmed her worst fears. American aircraft, you will disengage immediately and return to your base. We have lawful salvage rights to experimental technology in international waters. Lawful salvage rights. The phrase made Nakamura's blood run cold. Whoever these people were, they knew enough about Alina's situation to claim legal justification for recovering her aircraft, which meant intelligence sources deep enough to access information about programs that were supposedly beyond normal classification channels. Control, this is Phantom 1. Unknown aircraft are claiming salvage rights to experimental technology. Request immediate clarification of rules of engagement and legal authority for use of force. General Morrison's voice came back immediately, carrying the weight of absolute military authority. Phantom 1, there are no salvage rights applicable to classified military technology. You are cleared to engage with extreme prejudice. Repeat, you are weapons-free against any aircraft attempting to interfere with recovery operations. Nakamura felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that preceded combat, her vision sharpening and her awareness expanding to take in every detail of the tactical situation. Altitude 38,000 feet, airspeed 420 knots, weapons systems fully armed and targeted. 3 wingmen in perfect formation, ready to follow her lead into whatever hell awaited them in the brightening sky. Phantom Flight, this is lead. We are weapons-free. Engage on my command. The next few seconds would determine not just the fate of Alina's experimental aircraft, but the future of military aviation research and the price that individual pilots paid for technologies that existed at the edge of human understanding. In the vast emptiness of the Pacific dawn, 4 American pilots prepared to fight and possibly die for secrets that officially didn't exist, protecting a fellow aviator who had been dead for 3 years and technology that challenged the basic laws of physics. Major Kale Nakamura checked her weapons systems one final time, said a silent prayer for Alina wherever she existed in the quantum foam between realities, and prepared to discover what it really meant to serve something larger than herself. The unknown aircraft continued their approach, and the morning sky prepared to become a battlefield where the stakes were measured not just in human lives, but in the future of warfare itself. The first missiles launched at 4:23 hours, streaking through the pre-dawn sky like deadly comets trailing fire and purpose. Nakamura saw them on her radar warning receiver before she saw them with her eyes, 4 heat-seeking projectiles closing the distance between aircraft at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. "Phantom flight, break, break, break," she called out, throwing her F-22 into a violent left turn while simultaneously deploying chaff and flares in a desperate attempt to confuse the incoming missiles. The G-forces pressed her deep into her ejection seat, but 15 years of training kept her conscious and alert as the world spun around her aircraft. Rico's voice came through the radio with professional calm despite the mortal danger surrounding them all. "Lead, I count 4 missiles inbound. Phantom 3 and 4 are evading, but those aren't standard heat seekers. They're tracking through defensive countermeasures." Nakamura's blood ran cold. Advanced air-to-air missiles that could track through electronic countermeasures meant their opponents weren't flying export-model fighters with downgraded weapons systems. These were frontline military aircraft with the latest in missile technology, which raised uncomfortable questions about which nation's air force was willing to engage American fighters over international waters. "Phantom flight, go active on radar and return fire. Authorization code Alpha 77 Charlie. We are cleared to engage with all available weapons." The authorization code unlocked her aircraft's full combat potential, bringing online weapons systems that were normally restricted to wartime operations. Her heads-up display immediately populated with targeting information as her radar began actively tracking the 6 unknown aircraft, revealing flight characteristics and electronic signatures that made her heart skip a beat. "Control, this is Phantom 1. Unknown aircraft are displaying radar signatures consistent with Su-35 flankery fighters. Repeat, we are engaged with advanced Russian military aircraft over international waters." The implications hit her even as she was selecting targets and preparing to launch her own missiles. Russian Su-35s operating this far from any known base meant either aircraft carrier operations or aerial refueling from support aircraft that weren't showing up on radar. Either option suggested a level of planning and commitment that went far beyond opportunistic salvage operations. "Phantom 1 control. You are cleared to engage any aircraft posing a threat to mission objectives. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Repeat, weapons-free." Nakamura locked her first AIM-120 AMRAAM missile on the lead Su-35 and squeezed the trigger. The advanced medium-range air-to-air missile dropped from her internal weapons bay and ignited, accelerating toward its target with deadly precision. Around her, the other members of Phantom Flight were launching their own missiles, filling the morning sky with contrails and the distinctive smoke signatures of modern air-to-air combat. Fox 1, she called out, using the standard brevity code for active radar-guided missiles. "Target bearing 045, distance 20 miles. The tactical situation evolved with the split-second timing that characterized modern aerial warfare. Missiles crossed paths in the thin air, their guidance systems searching for targets while pilots threw their aircraft into evasive maneuvers that pushed both human endurance and mechanical engineering to their limits. Nakamura found herself flying inverted at nearly 600 miles per hour, her aircraft's fly-by-wire controls translating her inputs into flight paths that would have been impossible for earlier generations of fighter aircraft. "Phantom 2, missile closing on your 6, she called out, watching Rico's heat signature dance across her display as he attempted to evade an incoming Russian missile. "Deploy countermeasures and go vertical." Rico's F-22 climbed almost straight up, its twin engines generating enough thrust to accelerate the 30-ton aircraft toward the stratosphere like a rocket. Behind him, the pursuing missile lost lock as it encountered a cloud of chaff and flares, but the respite was temporary. Modern missiles were designed to reacquire targets after losing initial lock, and the Russian weapons pursuing Phantom flight were among the most advanced in the world. The first explosion came from the northeast, where one of her AMRAAMs had found its target. The Su-35 simply vanished from radar, replaced by a brief fireball and expanding cloud of debris that sparkled in the growing dawn light. But the remaining 5 Russian aircraft continued their attack, their pilots displaying the kind of aggressive professionalism that suggested extensive combat experience. "Splash 1, Nakamura transmitted to control. Unknown aircraft confirmed as Su-35 flankery fighters with Russian Air Force markings. This is not a salvage operation. This is a planned military interception." General Morrison's voice came back through the static with grim authority. "Phantom 1, engage and destroy all hostile aircraft. Be advised that diplomatic consequences are secondary to mission success. Repeat, complete mission success takes precedence over all other considerations." The cold calculation in those words told Nakamura everything she needed to know about the value of Alina's experimental aircraft. The military was willing to risk an international incident, possibly even military conflict with Russia, to prevent that technology from being compromised, which raised the disturbing question of what capabilities Alina's aircraft possessed that made it worth such extreme measures. "Phantom 3, I've got a missile lock warning." Lieutenant Sarah Kim's voice carried the tension of her first air-to-air combat engagement, requesting permission to go defensive. 3, you're cleared defensive. Break right and climb." Nakamura banked her own aircraft toward Kim's position, hopping to draw the attacking Su-35 into a less advantageous position. Air-to-air combat was as much about positioning as it was about weapons technology, and 15 years of experience had taught her that altitude and angle could make the difference between survival and becoming another statistic in classified after-action reports. The missile targeting Kim streaked through the morning air, its contrail drawing a deadly line across the sky. At the last possible second, Kim's F-22 rolled inverted and dove toward the ocean surface, using gravity and raw speed to outrun the pursuing weapon. The missile lost lock and self-destructed, but 2 more Su-35s were already maneuvering to bracket her aircraft with crossing fire solutions. 4, support 3's defensive maneuver, Nakamura ordered, simultaneously launching another AMRAAM at the nearest Russian aircraft. "Rico, you're with me. We're going to bracket the lead element." The dogfight developed with the terrifying beauty that characterized modern aerial warfare. Aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars danced through the thin air at speeds that pushed the boundaries of human endurance, their pilots making split-second decisions that meant the difference between victory and death. Contrails drew geometric patterns across the morning sky, and the Pacific Ocean below remained serenely indifferent to the life-and-death struggle taking place in the atmosphere above. Nakamura's second missile found its target, sending another Su-35 tumbling toward the ocean in pieces. But the remaining Russian aircraft weren't retreating. Instead, they were coordinating their attacks with the kind of tactical precision that suggested this engagement was far more important to them than simple salvage operations would warrant. "Control, this is Phantom 1. Russian aircraft are continuing aggressive engagement despite losses. They're willing to accept casualties to complete their mission, which suggests intelligence sources that go beyond opportunistic interception." The response came back from General Morrison with the weight of absolute military authority. Phantom 1, source of intelligence compromise is irrelevant to current mission requirements. Eliminate all hostile aircraft and prepare to receive further instructions regarding experimental technology recovery. Further instructions. Nakamura processed the implications while simultaneously evading a missile launched by one of the remaining Su-35. Alina was still in phase displacement, invisible to conventional sensors, but counting down toward quantum field generator failure. When those generators collapsed, she would either return to normal space-time where she could be recovered, or scatter her molecular structure across multiple dimensions in a manner that would eliminate both her and the experimental technology permanently. Either outcome suited the people giving orders from secure command bunkers hundreds of miles away. Alina's return would allow recovery of valuable technology, along with whatever intelligence she'd gathered during 3 years of displacement. Her death would eliminate both a potential security leak and technology too advanced for safe deployment. From a strategic perspective, General Morrison and his colleagues couldn't lose. But Major Kale Nakamura was discovering that strategic perspectives looked very different from the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, engaged in air-to-air combat 38,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. Alina wasn't just experimental technology or potential security risk. She was a fellow pilot who had volunteered for dangerous duty and ended up trapped between realities, counting down toward either salvation or molecular dissolution. Phantom 4, you've got a flanker closing on your 3 o'clock, she called out, watching Captain Mike Torres attempt to evade the Russian fighter that was trying to establish a firing solution. Go vertical and I'll bracket him from below. Torres pulled his F-22 into a climb that pushed the aircraft's performance envelope, but the pursuing Su-35 matched his maneuver with the fluid grace of a pilot who knew his aircraft's capabilities intimately. The Russian fired another missile, this one tracking perfectly despite Torres' defensive countermeasures. Nakamura launched her third AMRAAM of the engagement, watching the missile streak toward the Su-35 that was pursuing Torres. At the same moment, she realized that the Russian pilot had anticipated her move. Another Su-35 was dropping down from higher altitude, positioning itself for a shot at her aircraft while she was focused on saving her wingman. The next few seconds unfolded with the terrible clarity that accompanied moments of mortal danger. Torres' aircraft shuddered as the Russian missile detonated close enough to damage his left engine, sending him into an uncontrolled spin toward the ocean's surface. The Su-35 pursuing him vanished in the fireball of Nakamura's missile strike, but the fighter diving toward her was already launching its own weapons. Phantom 1 missile launch. Rico's voice cut through the tactical frequency with desperate urgency. Break left and climb. I'm moving to intercept. Nakamura threw her aircraft into a climbing left turn that compressed her body against the ejection seat with more than 7 times the force of gravity. Her vision grayed at the edges as blood flow to her brain decreased, but training and determination kept her conscious as the Russian missile streaked through the space where her aircraft had been moments before. Rico's F-22 dove from above like an avenging angel, his own missile already tracking toward the Su-35 that had nearly killed her. The Russian pilot tried to evade, but Rico had anticipated the maneuver and positioned his shot perfectly. The Su-35 exploded in a fireball that momentarily lit the morning sky brighter than the rising sun. Phantom 4 is hit. Torres' voice came through the radio with the strain of someone fighting both his aircraft and gravity to survive. Left engine is gone, hydraulic pressure dropping, but I think I can maintain controlled flight. 4. What's your status for continued engagement? Nakamura asked while simultaneously searching the sky for the remaining 2 Russian aircraft. Her radar showed them withdrawing toward the northeast, but she'd learned not to trust apparent retreats in combat situations. Lead, I can maintain formation, but I'm not combat effective. Weapons systems are offline, and I'm nursing this thing home on one engine. Nakamura made her decision with the kind of split-second certainty that had kept her alive through 15 years of military flying. 4. You're cleared to return to base. Maintain altitude if possible and squawk emergency frequencies. Rico and 3, close up on me. We're going to finish this. The 2 remaining Su-35s had indeed withdrawn, but her radar was showing them circling at long range rather than retreating toward their base. They were waiting for something, and Nakamura had a sinking feeling that she knew what it was. "Alina," she transmitted on the emergency frequency, hoping that quantum displacement didn't interfere with radio communications entirely. "If you can hear this, I need a status update on your quantum field generators." The response came back through static so heavy it was barely recognizable as human speech. "Phantom 1, field generators, critical failure, forced transition in, approximately, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The remaining Russian aircraft weren't retreating. They were waiting for Alina to emerge from phase displacement, damaged and vulnerable, so they could complete their mission without having to fight through 3 F-22 Raptors to reach her. "Control, this is Phantom 1. Contact reports forced return to normal spacetime in 15 minutes. Remaining hostile aircraft are maintaining standoff distance, probably waiting for forced transition. Request immediate tactical support and recovery assets." General Morrison's response carried the weight of decisions made in secure rooms where the human cost of operations was measured in acceptable loss ratios rather than individual lives. "Phantom 1, nearest tactical support is 40 minutes away. You are cleared to take any action necessary to prevent compromise of experimental technology, including destruction of assets if recovery is impossible." There it was again, the clinical language that reduced Alina to experimental technology and her death to destruction of assets. But Major Kale Nakamura had spent the last hour listening to Alina's voice, hearing the desperation and determination of someone who had volunteered for dangerous duty and ended up trapped in a nightmare beyond anything military planners had anticipated. "Rico, you getting all this?" she asked on their internal frequency. "Copy lead. And I've got to say, this is turning into one hell of a moral dilemma. Command is basically ordering us to kill an American pilot to prevent the Russians from capturing her aircraft." "That's one interpretation," Nakamura replied. "The other interpretation is that we're being ordered to protect Alina from capture, interrogation, and whatever else the Russians might do to extract information about experimental programs. And if Alina would prefer capture to death." The question hung in the thin air between them like a physical presence. Military training covered rules of engagement, acceptable casualties, and the priority of mission success over individual survival. But it didn't address situations where American pilots might be ordered to kill other American pilots to protect classified technology. "Alina," Nakamura transmitted, "you need to understand the tactical situation. I have 2 Russian aircraft waiting for you to emerge from phase displacement. Command has authorized me to prevent compromise of your technology using any means necessary. That authorization includes—" She paused, looking for words that wouldn't sound like a death sentence. "It includes ensuring that your aircraft doesn't fall into enemy hands." The static seemed to pulse with emotion before Alina's response came through. "Phantom 1, I understand, military necessity, but I need you to know something about the quantum field generators." "I'm listening." "Forced transition won't return me to normal spacetime. Generators are too damaged. Forced transition will scatter my molecular structure across parallel dimensions. From your perspective, I'll just vanish." The words hit Nakamura like physical blows. Alina wasn't facing capture or death in any conventional sense. She was facing complete dissolution across multiple realities, a fate that challenged basic human understanding of existence and mortality. The experimental technology that everyone was so desperate to protect or acquire would disappear along with its pilot, leaving nothing but questions that could never be answered. Alina, is there anything we can do? Any way to stabilize the quantum field generators? Negative, Phantom One, but there is something else. If you can, position your aircraft in specific formation relative to my transition coordinates. I might be able to transfer some data about the experimental programs before field collapse. Data transfer. Alina was offering to provide intelligence about experimental programs that went beyond classification levels, information that could expose the truth about projects that existed in the shadows between official military operations and black-budget research. It was the kind of intelligence that could either save lives by preventing future volunteers from facing Alina's fate, or destroy careers by revealing the human cost of pushing technological boundaries beyond safe limits. What kind of data? Personnel files, project specifications, casualty reports for volunteers who didn't survive earlier phases, financial records showing budget diversions from conventional programs. Each item Alina mentioned represented evidence of military operations that officially didn't exist, conducted by people whose names appeared in no public records, funded through budgets that were classified beyond normal security levels. It was the kind of information that General Morrison and his colleagues would do anything to prevent from becoming public knowledge. Control, this is Phantom One. Contact is offering to transfer classified data about experimental programs before field generator collapse, requesting guidance on information security protocols. The silence from Edwards Air Force Base stretched long enough to confirm Nakamura's suspicions about the true nature of her orders. Finally, General Morrison's voice came back with the cold authority of someone making decisions that would affect national security at the highest levels. Phantom One, you are ordered to prevent any data transfer regarding classified programs. Repeat, no information about experimental projects will be transmitted or recorded through any medium. Mission parameters remain unchanged. Prevent compromise of experimental technology using any means necessary. The order was clear, unambiguous, and morally repugnant. Alina was offering to provide evidence about programs that had apparently cost multiple lives, and Command was ordering Nakamura to prevent that information from ever reaching people who might be able to prevent future casualties. Rico, she said on their internal frequency, please tell me you're recording all communications on this frequency. Already on it, Lead. Whatever happens next, there's going to be a record of what Command is ordering us to do. Nakamura looked out at the morning sky, where two Russian fighters circled at the edge of missile range, and waited for an American pilot to emerge from quantum displacement, so they could complete a mission that might prevent crucial information from reaching the American people. Below her, the Pacific Ocean rolled in endless waves, indifferent to the moral choices being made in the thin air above its surface. In 10 minutes, Alina would begin forced transition from phase displacement, and Major Kale Nakamura would discover what it really meant to follow orders that conflicted with everything she believed about duty, honor, and the protection of fellow Americans who had volunteered to serve something larger than themselves. The next few minutes would determine not just Alina's fate, but Nakamura's understanding of the military she had served for 15 years, and the price that individual soldiers paid for technologies that existed at the edge of human knowledge. Alina, she transmitted, her voice carrying across the static-filled frequency, stand by for tactical coordination. We're going to find a way through this that doesn't abandon you to the Russians or the people who sent you on this mission in the first place. The radio crackled with interference, and somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, Captain Alina Restrepo prepared for a transition that would either save her life or scatter her existence across dimensions beyond human understanding. Major Kale Nakamura checked her remaining missiles, looked out at the circling Russian fighters, and prepared to discover whether 15 years of military training had prepared her for the moral complexities of a war that officially didn't exist. The forced transition began at 4:41 hours, with a distortion in the morning sky that made Nakamura's eyes water and her instruments flicker with interference patterns that shouldn't have been possible. Space itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw multiple versions of the same aircraft occupying slightly different positions in the same patch of sky. Phantom 1, transition initiated. Alina's voice came through the static with increasing distortion, as if she were speaking from an ever greater distance despite being only a few hundred meters away. Quantum field generators, failing faster than calculated. I have maybe 3 minutes before complete collapse. The two Russian Su-35s immediately broke from their holding pattern, accelerating toward the distortion with the purposeful efficiency of pilots who had trained extensively for this exact scenario. Their radar signatures intensified as they activated missile guidance systems, and Nakamura realized with growing horror that they weren't planning to capture Alina's aircraft intact. They were planning to shoot it down and recover whatever wreckage survived the crash. Rico 3, the Russians are moving to engage, she transmitted while banking her F-22 toward an intercept course. They're going hot, so we need to bracket them before they can establish firing solutions on Alina. Lieutenant Kim's voice came back with the controlled tension of someone facing her second air-to-air combat engagement in less than an hour. Lead, my missile inventory is down to 2 AMRAAMs and 4 Sidewinders. How do you want to handle this? Nakamura quickly calculated the tactical situation. 3 F-22s with limited ammunition against 2 Su-35 that were willing to accept casualties to complete their mission. Alina's aircraft flickering in and out of normal spacetime as quantum field generators struggled to maintain coherence. And somewhere in secure command bunkers, people with general stars and security clearances beyond classification levels were making decisions about acceptable losses and mission priorities. We're going to use our stealth advantage, she decided. Go passive on radar and approach from different vectors. They know we're here, but they don't know exactly where we are. Alina, can you give me precise coordinates for your transition point? Transition coordinates, latitude 34 degrees, 47 minutes north, longitude 141 degrees, 12 minutes west, altitude 37,800 feet. Nakamura entered the coordinates into her navigation system, while simultaneously maneuvering to put herself between the Russian fighters and Alina's position. The quantum distortion was growing more pronounced, creating visual effects that reminded her uncomfortably of aurora borealis, except they were occurring at the wrong altitude and in broad daylight. Alina, you mentioned data transfer capability. Can you transmit while maintaining phase coherence? Affirmative, but transmission will accelerate field collapse, maybe 90 seconds of coherent data stream before molecular dissolution. 90 seconds. Enough time to transmit personnel files, casualty reports, and evidence of experimental programs that had apparently cost multiple lives in pursuit of technology that might not even be worth the human sacrifice. But those 90 seconds would also guarantee Alina's death, and Nakamura found herself facing a choice between saving one life and potentially saving many future volunteers from similar fates. Control, this is Phantom 1. Contact reports capability for classified data transmission with 90-second window before field collapse. Request immediate guidance on information handling protocols. General Morrison's response came back immediately, carrying the weight of absolute military authority. Phantom 1, you are expressly forbidden to receive any data transmission from experimental aircraft. Jamming protocols are authorized to prevent information compromise. Repeat, prevent all data transmission using any means necessary. The order was clear, but Nakamura noticed something else in the transmission. background noise that suggested multiple people were monitoring the conversation from different locations. Alina's offer to transmit evidence about experimental programs had apparently triggered emergency conferences among people whose names she would never know and whose faces never appeared in public photographs. Phantom One, I can hear your command frequency. Alina's voice came through the static with desperate urgency. They're ordering you to prevent data transmission because evidence shows experimental programs have killed 47 volunteers over the past 5 years. 47 volunteers. The number hit Nakamura like a physical blow, representing individual pilots who had volunteered for dangerous duty and paid the ultimate price for technologies that existed at the edge of human understanding. 47 people whose deaths had been classified beyond normal security levels, whose families had been told convenient lies about training accidents and equipment failures. Alina confirmed that number, 47 casualties. Confirmed, and that's just the ones I have documented evidence for. Actual number is probably much higher. Rico's voice cut through their internal frequency with barely controlled anger. Lead, please tell me we're not about to let the only witness to military experiments that have killed dozens of our own people vanish into quantum foam because some general doesn't want the truth getting out. The moral calculus was brutal in its simplicity. Follow orders and allow Alina to die with her secrets, ensuring that future volunteers might face similar fates without knowing the true casualty rates of experimental programs. Or disobey direct orders from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and accept whatever consequences came from prioritizing individual conscience over military obedience. Russian aircraft are at missile range, Lieutenant Kim reported. They're going to launch in 30 seconds unless we intercept. Nakamura made her decision with the kind of split-second certainty that had defined her entire military career. Alina, begin data transmission immediately. Broadcast on all available frequencies and record everything locally. If they want to court-martial me for saving lives, they can start with a full investigation of experimental programs that have been killing American pilots. Phantom One, beginning transmission, all channels. Alina's voice suddenly changed, becoming clearer and more authoritative as quantum field generators channeled their remaining power into communication systems rather than phase displacement. Technical specifications, personnel files, and casualty reports began streaming across multiple radio frequencies, painting a picture of experimental programs that operated beyond normal oversight and safety protocols. Control, this is Phantom One, Nakamura transmitted while simultaneously maneuvering to intercept the approaching Russian fighters. Be advised that classified data regarding experimental programs is being broadcast on multiple frequencies. Any attempts to jam transmissions will be considered hostile action against American personnel conducting lawful investigation of safety violations. The silence from Edwards Air Force Base spoke volumes about the legal and political implications of Alina's data transmission. General Morrison and his colleagues were facing the nightmare scenario of operational security, classified information about illegal or unethical programs being broadcast, where it could be intercepted by congressional oversight committees, investigative journalists, and foreign intelligence services. Phantom One, you are ordered to terminate data transmission immediately. Failure to comply will result in court-martial proceedings and criminal charges under the Espionage Act. The threat was both specific and terrifying. The Espionage Act carried penalties that included life imprisonment for military personnel who compromised classified information, regardless of their motivations or the public interest implications of their actions. But 47 dead volunteers represented a higher law than military regulations, and Nakamura found herself willing to face whatever consequences came from choosing human life over institutional protection. Alina, continue transmission. Rico 3, we have incoming missiles. The Russian Su-35s had launched simultaneously, sending 4 advanced air-to-air missiles streaking toward Alina's position, while she flickered between realities and broadcast evidence of American military programs that had killed dozens of volunteers. Nakamura launched her remaining AMRAAMs at the Russian fighters while throwing her aircraft into a defensive pattern designed to intercept the missiles targeting Alina. The next 30 seconds unfolded with the terrible beauty of modern aerial warfare. Missiles crossed paths in the thin air, while Alina's voice continued transmitting personnel files and casualty reports across multiple frequencies. One of the Russian missiles detonated close enough to Alina's aircraft to disrupt her quantum field generators, sending ripples of distortion across the morning sky that made reality itself seem unstable. Field generators, critical failure, 30 seconds to molecular dissolution. Alina's voice was becoming increasingly distorted as her aircraft struggled to maintain coherence between dimensions. Transmission, 80% complete. Need 15 more seconds. Nakamura's missile found its target, sending one of the Su-35s tumbling toward the ocean in a fireball that briefly outshone the rising sun. But the remaining Russian fighter was already maneuvering for another attack, its pilot displaying the kind of desperate professionalism that suggested this mission was worth dying for from his perspective as well. Rico, bracket the remaining flanker. I'm going to try to shield Alina during the final transmission phase. Nakamura positioned her F-22 between Alina's flickering aircraft and the approaching Russian fighter, using her Raptor's stealth characteristics to confuse missile guidance systems, while Alina's voice continued broadcasting evidence that would transform public understanding of experimental military programs. Around them, the morning sky was filled with contrails, smoke trails, and the geometric patterns of modern aerial combat. Transmission, 95% complete. Alina's voice was barely recognizable through the quantum interference. Phantom 1, thank you for choosing truth over orders. The final missile launch came from the remaining Su-35, but Rico's perfectly timed shot eliminated the Russian fighter before its weapon could reach Alina's position. The missile lost guidance and tumbled harmlessly toward the Pacific Ocean below, joining the debris from multiple aircraft that had died in the morning sky over secrets that officially didn't exist. Transmission complete. Alina's voice came through one final time, carrying a note of peace that transcended the technical specifications of quantum field collapse. Tell the families of the other volunteers that their sacrifice meant something. The distortion in spacetime suddenly collapsed, creating a brief implosion that seemed to draw light itself into a point no larger than a period on a printed page. For a moment, the morning sky held its breath. Then Captain Alina Restrepo and her experimental aircraft were gone, scattered across dimensions beyond human understanding, leaving only empty air and the echo of transmissions that would change everything. Major Kale Nakamura flew through the sudden silence, her aircraft's engines the only sound in a sky that had been filled with combat just moments before. Below her, the Pacific Ocean rolled in endless waves, indifferent to the human drama that had played out in the atmosphere above its surface. "Control, this is Phantom 1, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Mission complete. Experimental technology has been secured from foreign acquisition. Recommend immediate investigation of casualty rates in classified programs based on transmitted data." The response from Edwards Air Force Base came back with the cold authority of damage control already in motion. "Phantom 1, return to base immediately. All communications regarding this mission are classified beyond your current clearance level. You will report for debriefing upon landing." Nakamura acknowledged the transmission while privately wondering whether she would be debriefed or court-martialed first. Alina's data transmission had been broadcast on frequencies that could be monitored by anyone with appropriate radio equipment, which meant the evidence of experimental programs killing American volunteers was no longer containable within military channels. Rico, you still recording all this? Every word, lead. And I've got to say, I'm proud to have served with someone willing to put conscience over career advancement. As they turned toward home, flying through a morning sky that had been transformed by combat and moral choices that would echo through their careers and beyond, Major Kale Nakamura reflected on the price of serving something larger than herself. Alina was gone, scattered across dimensions in a manner that challenged human understanding of death and existence. But her final transmission had ensured that 47 dead volunteers would not be forgotten, and that future participants in experimental programs would know the true costs of pushing technological boundaries beyond safe limits. The sun continued its rise over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Nakamura of Alina's final moments, beautiful, terrible, and ultimately transcendent. In the distance, Edwards Air Force Base waited with questions, investigations, and consequences that would determine whether choosing truth over orders had been worth the price they would all pay for their decision. But for now, in the growing light of a new day over the endless ocean, Major Kale Nakamura flew homeward knowing that some secrets were worth preserving, others were worth revealing, and the difference between the two defined the true meaning of service to country and conscience. The debriefing began 6 hours after landing, in a windowless room deep within Edwards Air Force Base, where the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows and recording equipment captured every word for analysis by people whose names Nakamura would never learn. General Morrison sat across from her with the impassive expression of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected national security at levels beyond public comprehension. Major Nakamura, he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute military authority, you are aware that your actions this morning violated direct orders regarding classified information security. Nakamura sat at attention, her flight suit still smelling of jet fuel and the adrenaline aftermath of aerial combat. Yes, sir. I am aware that I disobeyed orders to prevent data transmission regarding experimental programs. And you understand that such disobedience constitutes a violation of military law, potentially punishable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and relevant espionage statutes. I understand the potential legal consequences, sir. However, I believe that preserving evidence regarding the deaths of 47 American volunteers superseded orders that would have concealed those casualties from appropriate oversight. General Morrison's expression didn't change, but Nakamura noticed a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested her response had hit targets she hadn't known existed. Major, the casualties you reference were volunteers who understood the risks associated with experimental programs. Their deaths, while regrettable, were within acceptable parameters for research that advances American military capabilities. Respectfully, sir, acceptable to whom? The volunteers who died didn't know the true casualty rates of the programs they were joining. Their families weren't told the real circumstances of their deaths. And the American people who fund these programs through their tax dollars have no knowledge that experimental research is costing dozens of lives. The American people, General Morrison replied with cold precision, elect representatives who delegate oversight authority to individuals with appropriate security clearances. Your obligation is to follow orders, not to make policy decisions about information disclosure. The argument was both logically sound and morally bankrupt, representing the institutional thinking that had allowed experimental programs to kill dozens of volunteers, while maintaining plausible deniability through classification levels that prevented accountability. Nakamura had spent 15 years following orders without question, but Alina's desperate transmissions had forced her to confront the difference between legal obedience and ethical responsibility. Sir, if I may ask, what was the nature of Captain Restrepo's original mission? What was she supposed to accomplish during 3 years of quantum displacement? General Morrison consulted a tablet computer before responding, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone discussing technical specifications rather than human tragedy. Captain Restrepo was part of Project Looking Glass, an experimental program designed to develop reconnaissance capabilities using quantum displacement technology. The intended mission duration was 6 months, with regular return to normal spacetime for debriefing and technical maintenance. But something went wrong. The quantum field generators were more unstable than initial testing had indicated. Captain Restrepo's aircraft became trapped in phase displacement, unable to return to normal spacetime without risking catastrophic field collapse. For 3 years, she existed between dimensions while our technical staff worked to develop recovery procedures. The clinical language couldn't disguise the human horror of Alina's situation. 3 years trapped between realities, watching parallel versions of her own life unfold while being unable to return to any of them. 3 years of isolation that would have driven most people insane, sustained only by military discipline and the hope that someone would eventually find a way to bring her home. Why wasn't her family informed that she was still alive? Because from the perspective of our reality, Captain Restrepo was dead. The quantum displacement had removed her from normal spacetime so completely that she couldn't affect events in our dimension or be affected by them. Informing her family would have served no purpose except to cause additional emotional trauma. Nakamura felt her hands clench into fists beneath the debriefing table. The institutional logic was perfect, reducing Alina's 3-year nightmare to a technicality that justified lying to her family about the circumstances of her death. It was the kind of reasoning that allowed bureaucrats to sleep comfortably, while the people who actually risked their lives for experimental programs paid prices that couldn't be calculated in budget spreadsheets. General Morrison, how many other volunteers are currently missing in action due to experimental program failures? The silence that followed her question spoke volumes about information that remained classified beyond her clearance level. Finally, General Morrison responded with the careful precision of someone who had received extensive legal briefing about what could and couldn't be discussed, even in classified debriefing sessions. That information is compartmentalized beyond your current need to know, Major. However, I can tell you that Project Looking Glass has been suspended pending technical review of quantum displacement safety protocols. Suspended, not canceled, which meant that somewhere in the vast military-industrial complex, research was continuing into technologies that had already killed dozens of volunteers and left others trapped between dimensions in fates that challenged human understanding of existence and mortality. Sir, I need to know, is the data that Captain Restrepo transmitted being reviewed by appropriate oversight authorities? General Morrison's expression hardened into the mask of institutional authority that Nakamura had learned to recognize during 15 years of military service. Major, the information transmitted by Captain Restrepo this morning has been classified at levels that require congressional notification and executive oversight. Multiple agencies are currently reviewing the data to determine appropriate responses to any safety or legal issues that may be identified. The bureaucratic language was reassuring in its implications. Congressional notification meant that Alina's sacrifice had succeeded in bringing classified programs under legislative oversight. Executive oversight meant that decisions about experimental research would now involve people who were accountable to voters rather than just military hierarchy. But Nakamura also recognized the subtle warning embedded in General Morrison's response. The data was being reviewed by multiple agencies, which meant that her own actions were being evaluated by intelligence services that operated outside normal military justice systems. People with security clearances beyond classification levels were making decisions about what happened to military officers who chose conscience over orders. General, what are my options regarding continued service in the Air Force? That depends entirely on the results of multiple ongoing investigations. Major, your combat performance this morning was exemplary, and your dedication to protecting American personnel was commendable. However, your decision to disobey direct orders regarding classified information has created complications that extend beyond normal disciplinary procedures. Complications. The euphemism covered everything from court-martial proceedings to transfer to assignments that would effectively end her flying career. But it also suggested that her superiors weren't entirely certain about the legal and political implications of prosecuting an officer who had revealed evidence of programs that killed American volunteers. Sir, I wanted on the record that I would make the same decision again under similar circumstances. The lives of American military personnel are more important than the institutional reputation of programs that operate beyond normal safety oversight. General Morrison nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly that response. That statement will be included in your official file, Major, along with commendations for extraordinary performance under combat conditions and recommendations from multiple sources regarding your dedication to fellow service members. The meeting concluded with handshakes that carried the weight of mutual respect despite fundamental disagreements about orders, conscience, and the price of serving something larger than individual career advancement. As NAC,